Hey guys, welcome to Planet Speakeasy. I'm Tony Lin. At this bilingual podcast, we share stories about those who are living in between different worlds. The guest of this week is Professor David Craig from the University of Southern California. We crossed paths in Southeast Asia when he was in the field researching global influencers, an area he's been studying for a decade. Having transitioned from a Hollywood producer into academia, he's published 3 books and over 24 articles about international creators, specifically on the Wanghongs, which are the influencers in China.
The lie down movement, right? Okay, why am I working so hard to do this? But it would be a mistake to think that those are the same people who are then turning into Wanghong, because Wanghong is still extremely difficult. It's much harder than it looked. Like, oh, we're just hanging out online. We're just being friends. We're just being pals. What you don't know is that there's 30 people sitting in the other room helping them sell products and push out brands and deals. So it's an illusion.
We traded our thoughts on how internet culture has changed, how that has impacted our own lives, and more importantly, how do we find our own footing in a time where becoming a Wanghong has never been so dangerously tantalizing. I looked you up on Weibo. You had your 15 minutes on Chinese social media for your students' presentation on Yanxi Palace.
Yes, that freaked me out. That was a weird moment. I became Professor Wanghong for a week. Yeah. You want me to tell the story?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So again, I'm a visiting professor at Shanghai Xiaotong University in the Institute for Cultural and Creative Industries, and I would teach the Chollywood week. I would go and I would teach students for a week, everything. In 6 days, they had to learn what I usually teach in a whole semester. So the first project that we would do before I would arrive, because I had to hit the ground really fast and get them in the habit of doing research and doing presentations, I asked them to talk about different Chinese film, television, music, games, but look at it from outside of China. And where had these spread and been, where were these available, who made them available, how successful were they? And so a group of students had chosen Yanxi Palace, and they did this as their first presentation. Before I even started the class, they all had to present. So unbeknownst to me, the student took a picture of them and then a picture of me. And the lecture I gave about now this is what this class is about global Hollywood and global Chollywood and how these are 2 very different systems.
Yeah.
And she posted it on Weibo and she tagged the showrunner. The showrunner saw it and he reposted it. And then the production company saw it and then they paid to repost it. Oh, here's some American entertainment scholar talking about Yanxi Palace, right? And then I think the network or the streaming service that aired it also paid to promote it. So over the course of 1 week, I started scaling on Weibo. My phone was blowing up with like all my students and my alumni. My alumni kept saying, dude, you are trending on Weibo. And I'm like, why? And I got so nervous because I wasn't fully aware of what was happening. And the best part was I went immediately to my colleagues at Xiaota and said, look, I apologize. I didn't know this. I was happening. I had nothing to do with this. And their response was, are you kidding? This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to this program. We're gonna have more applications than we've ever had before. Everyone's gonna come here. You're the most important professor in our school right now. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, dude.
You didn't write that Wanghong train?
I know. I did not monetize that. I didn't turn that into, I know.
How did you end up here? Like your whole journey from Hollywood producing to, from film and TV and...
Well, the narrative starts at when I was 8. Quite truthfully, I was not allowed to watch a lot of TV growing up, but I was allowed to watch movies because my teachers understood that movies could be used as education.
Right.
I thought these were Hollywood movies. They turned out to be made for television movies, but in any case, these were movies that taught me about race relations when I grew up right smack in the middle of the civil rights movement.
Right.
There were no textbooks. It wasn't like they could give you a textbook, or even they weren't going to give a third grader Martin Luther King's letters from a Birmingham jail, right?
Right.
But they could show you Brian Song or Jane Pittman or Roots and say, look, there's something important you should learn from this.
And you're from the South.
From the South. I was smack in the middle of all of it, but no one was able to explain it to me. I didn't grow up in a home that was filled with, newspapers, or we didn't even watch the evening news growing up. So the only way I understood there was something bigger going on in the world was through movies. So I thought movies were a great way to teach. And I kind of spectacularly and arrogantly and precociously said, that's what I want to do. Yeah. And that's what I did. I went to Hollywood to be a teacher by making movies that could then be shown in classrooms. Yeah. And that, in the weirdest of ways, is exactly what happened. I made about 30 of them. And almost all of them did end up being shown in classrooms.
Wow.
But they were first and foremost movies made for television. So they had, first and foremost, they had to be concepts that would, attract an audience. They had to be highly rated. They had to be advertiser friendly. Yeah. I just got spectacularly lucky. I was laser focused that was the sort of work I wanted to do. And I kept thrown too far off my goals. I tell my students there are 3 good reasons to go to Hollywood, and I chose the 5th.
What are the 3?
The 3 is power, money, and fame, right?
Okay, yeah.
I went to be a teacher. And then I did it for 25 years. The made-for-TV movie went through a whole kind of crash and morphed into something else.
Yeah, because now most movies are made for TV.
They are, right? They're made for streaming, exactly. I did it, basically. I went out on a high. My last 2 movies were some of my most successful, but also they addressed issues that were really important to me, like marriage equality. So I felt very, very like I had achieved what I set out to do.
Right.
And then I also had a second dream, and the second dream was to go to academia to teach Hollywood. So I've been teaching for 15 years, basically graduate courses in how media industries work in the U.S., around the world, and other countries. How are media industries dealing with constant disruption, technological like streaming or generative AI, socioeconomic like the Me Too movement and BLM, economic crises, global social cultural crises, pandemics. I mean, all these factors that are
very small, tiny topipics.
Teeny. Yeah, I morphed weirdly into a global scholar because I couldn't see how to teach Hollywood in a solely international context, since Hollywood is effectively a global industry. Yes. By logics, it has to be. There's only 300 million Americans, and there's 7 billion people.
And in the past 10 years, to be honest, Hollywood in its own bubble, there aren't that many changes. It's just the changes are coming from the outside, like China.
I had to, in order to continue to teach global Hollywood, I had to teach what I called Chollywood, which drives people crazy, but it's a shorthand. I mean, I almost like the provocation, but it's just another way to refer to China's media industries. Yeah. And the kind of contestations between these two have changed so dramatically over the last 15 years. Right. So, when around 2011 to 14, they were coming closer and closer together. Wanda was buying Legendary, rumored to buy Paramount. There were all sorts of co-production things happening. Now they've gone and split completely. I also had the amazing privilege to teach a lot of global, international, and mostly Chinese students. About 10, 11 years ago, while I was teaching these courses, my students started to ask, can we also talk about YouTube? And I thought, well, hang on. What the hell is this? And I was your typical old white guy with wasn't paying attention. Yeah. And at that exact moment, this brilliant academic from Australia named Stuart Cunningham reached out to me and said, hey, I'm doing some research on YouTubers. Would you be willing to join me and help me out? And I'm like, yeah, because I want to be a better teacher. And we set off to do 3 interviews, and then it was 10 interviews, and then it was 100 interviews. And in some, we've done probably 300 to 400 interviews all over the world. And what started as this little project to see if YouTubers were just, amateur filmmakers trying to back into Hollywood, which was such a spectacularly stupid, banal question to even ask, turned into there's this whole huge, fast-growing, far more complex, interesting space that's occurring across social media all over the world and in different ways and with different genres and verticals of content. They're not producers. They're not filmmakers. We call them many things: creators, influencers, Wanghong, KOLs, Zubo, broadcast jockeys in Korea. I mean, we've got 1,000 names for them.
Right.
So we wrote a book called Social Media Entertainment. That was our first book that was basically saying this is not Hollywood. This is something else. It's new. It's changing. And these are some frameworks through which we might look at it.
How did you end up in this field in China?
So again, on top of having all these amazingly brilliant Chinese master students, they all started going back to China and getting jobs in the platform industry. And they all started working with Wanghong. And then whenever I would speak with them as alumni, they kept telling me things. And I kept going, wait, hang on. I happen to be looking at this outside China. I also was I'm a visiting scholar at Shanghai Jiaotong University. When I would teach there, I would ask and start to do research there about Chinese Wanghong and KOL Tsubo. And,
to be honest, in the past 10 years, I was in the States most of the time, even though I was heavily involved in the Chinese online discourses. What's funny is that a lot of Wanghong culture, influencer culture actually caught up in China first, and then it migrated to America, even though a lot of Americans, they have no idea. Like live streaming, it's like years and years behind America is, which is fascinating that you get a head start, like much, much more involved.
It was, again, incredible fortune, but also beyond amazing to discover once I started to really pivot to look at the conditions in which China has incubated its own creator culture. By 2016, I was giving talks and saying, no, you guys are 3 to 5 years ahead of us. You're ahead of the world. You've now leapfrogged over. You're not... the earlier notions that were such a Western bias notions of, oh, Youku is just YouTube, a ripoff of YouTube, which it definitely isn't anymore anyway. Or Weibo is Chinese Twitter. All these ridiculous claims. That may have been true in the first 6 months to a year of those platforms. And then, boom, those platforms just got accelerated. They got more sophisticated. They started introducing far more features and services. And they really also pivoted pretty quickly to create opportunities for Wanghong to flourish economically on those platforms, which Western platforms are still fighting. They still resist. They still don't want to pay creators what they're worth. They don't want to give them a seat at the table. They don't want to cede any more power to them. And that's in many ways with the blessing of American kind of governless and lack of regulation.
I don't know. I find it very conflicting here because it's not just the development, but also the exploitation and other kind of problems. Like the MCN industry, China is probably far more advanced. And it's kind of funny to look at like Hollywood last year, the whole strike thing, and Hollywood has a much stronger union that's trying to regulate AI.
I mean, that's the flip side is that China wouldn't necessarily allow for that sort of labor organizing to occur. And the MCN space is a particularly kind of lawless and unregulated space, but the government has been actually doing a lot to crack down on that in China. And the platforms have in many ways been asked to step into a much more of a bigger role. That said, there are rumored to be 25,000 MCNs in China alone, and that's not counting the growth of the MCN space outside of China off of Chinese platforms. Look, there's, how do I put this delicately? There's a double-edged sword that comes with using social media platforms to supercharge your economy, to encourage all sorts of economic revitalization, to solicit a much more stronger consumer consumption economy. The idea is that everyone should have their own Taobao store and should be selling and buying simultaneously everywhere. And the fact that Chinese brilliantly have understood this is an opportunity for rural Chinese to have a seat at the table, to be, they got a cell phone in their hands, they can also be Wanghong. And going out and helping train and provide skills in the most remote parts of China is both kind of come with all the gifts and the blessings and the virtues and all the vices and the exploitation and the excess, right? So What happens when you take traditional culture and turn it into consumption culture? That's going to have a lot of peril, right?
Yeah. And by the way, I find myself old-fashioned when I look at the Douyin videos and with all the AI voices. I got really cringed out. And then I realized, okay, it's the same in American TikTok. And now there are American TikTok videos really just narrating Chinese viral videos. What happened in China, and they say exact same thing in English. Yeah, I feel like it's either deja vu or I'm trapped in a kind of weird Christopher Nolan space.
I always make a joke that Black Mirror is a pretty amazing, brilliant show, but have you ever seen White Mirror? And they're like, because there is none. There's no science fiction utopian dramas because there's no conflict. All science fiction tends to be dystopian. It's got to have some sort of a problem at its thesis problem at its core in order for characters to go through that narrative. Right. So that's why you won't see that flip side of it. But that said, it's kind of spectacular how prescient Black Mirror was at anticipating so many things in our world, right?
It was sci-fi, but now it's a sobering and underwhelming documentary.
Yeah. It's like docu-fi. Yeah. It's scary and brilliant.
So what was your first entry point in terms of yourself? Like, how do you observe Chinese internet or Chinese Wanghong culture in the first place?
Two examples I would give is when we wrote the first book about global creator culture, mostly off of Western platforms, politics barely and governance barely entered into the discussion, other than a few major telecommunications acts that the U.S. government did to basically allow platforms to just be uninhibited. There wasn't much to say, really, at that moment about the role of the government and regulation. In order to write the Wanghong book, the policy section went first.
Right.
We had to start with government being in the state being directly involved in the formation of Wanghong culture and economy and the pushing everyone onto platforms and onto social media and into this Wanghong kind of mindset.
Right.
The other thing that we did, maybe I'm not so sure how successful it was, is that we started to understand that there's not one Chinese creator culture, there are multiple Chinese creator cultures. And we kind of crudely split them into three types: creative, cultural, and social. It was basically a taxonomy, kind of a rubric that we could use. So there were some platforms, for example, that were more social, about live streaming to bring people together simultaneously, to hang out online all day long, letting people just spend 8 hours a day online just hanging out. And then there were those platforms that were more creative. So it was more about crafts and skills and trades and even commerce and, everything from the pig farmer out in the hillside to the barista in Shanghai. And then there was what we called the cultural. And those were the Wanghong that were still very much rooted in bringing kind of flourishing more around both cosmopolitan and traditional Chinese culture. So the Li Chi-Chis of the world, but also the modern beauty lifestyle creators in Wanghong. We use that kind of as a framework, but I'm not sure how successful it holds up.
When you're looking at it, it feels quite intentional. Like Li Ziqi, everything's beautiful, but it's a highly curated image. I was very lucky that I lived through a time where a lot of influencers, they're not Wanghong technically, they are KOL probably. They rose to fame more naturally. It's not just in China, but everywhere in the world. People had a vastly different relationship with social media before. People felt safer and they can be more of themselves, not their curated selves, which is kind of funny.
I know it's critical, actually. It's really important that we understand that, it's not that these are two separate domains, but within this domain of creator culture or Wanghong culture, there are so many complex questions about that relationship between the creator and their community.
Right.
So for Li Chi-Chi, she probably has very little sense or awareness of who her audience, including globally, might be, but she's spectacularly brilliant at being able to monetize it. She has over 100 brands.
I think she knows.
She knows. She knows. But I would say that it isn't as intimate a relationship that she has with her community as Poppy Papichang, you know, and then I can't even go any further without mentioning what I consider to be the best documentary ever made about any creator culture happens to be about Chinese creator culture. A brilliant filmmaker named Wu Hao called People's Republic of Desire. And in my estimation, if you want to see, in fact, the critics even called it the real world Black Mirror. I always sound like I'm his agent promoting him because I am such a huge fan of the film, because the film dared to not only somehow brilliantly in 2015 went into this space that is now still even more real, but he asked much more interesting questions. He dared to say, okay, we don't really know who all the stakeholders are here. We're not sure what the platforms get out of this behavior, who the MCNs are operating in between, who's fueling this live streaming marathon competition that happens every year. But from the lens of these three different creators that he was following, you saw that this was spectacularly difficult, precarious, exhausting, taxing, hitting them, taking a toll on their mental health, may not even be profitable at the end of the day. It was a gamification of their online lives, but they also came from a different social cultural status that they might not have otherwise had any opportunity. This was a career and a possibility and a chance to advance socioeconomically in ways they never would have been afforded otherwise. So it was a way to look at this in a much broader understanding of there are limited ways for advancement in every society. And creator culture has both caused a tremendous amount of pain and grief and suffering, but also created a great deal of agency and opportunity and entrepreneurialism that otherwise never would have been allowed.
Right.
You see this here in Thailand, for example. I'm going to mispronounce her name, but Pim Pim Prai. I apologize for the name, but this is this rural young woman, not particularly well educated, but who has spectacularly figured out how to be one of the most powerful and successful TikTok sellers, with dozens of employees and a huge following, and she's generating a great deal of income, but also she's a provocateur. She's saying things that can offend her community, but she's also going out into rural Thai villages and saying, where's the support? Where's the funding? Where's the assistance for these communities? These are where I came from. And in some ways, she's kind of become a role model for rural, less educated women who don't have that many opportunities. You see this playing out in every creator culture around the world. And there are many creator cultures.
I start to notice very specific genre of content creators. They go to different market and to find counterfeit goods and to catch them in action. There are, nationalism. They go out and to look at, this thing looks like a Japanese flag. Do they believe in their cause, or how much of the thing they do is for the attention?
Oh, you've opened up a whole bag of worms. This is a really interesting one because the answer to that question more often than not lies in the eyes of the academic and the critic. Right. Because there is every reason to be skeptical and cynical and think they're only doing it for the clicks. They're only doing it for the attention. They know that the algorithm is going to reward them for this sort of borderline provocative and controversial and sometimes excessive drama. I tend to take a more nuanced view because it is my impression that a lot of creators turn out to also be complicated human beings that come from many different motivations. They're not only driven by the need to generate revenue. And the examples I would give is I'm a visiting scholar right now at Harvard in the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Technology, and in a program called Rebooting Social Media. I started to ask those questions about a year ago when I started this stint. Started looking at how there are many instances of creators now also getting involved in various causes. Right. Social movements, climate change issues. We see this a lot around geopolitical issues going on around in the world. Or even if it's not cause-based work, it's identity and representation. It's about declaring that their world and their community that they represent is just valuable and as worthy and as meaningful as anyone else's. Right. And so I started interrogating this a little more because that's a risky thing to do. You may get more clicks, you may get more attention by talking about these topics, but you'll lose more money. You'll lose the brands, you'll lose the advertisers, and the platforms themselves will sometimes demonetize you. So, or you could lose your community because there's a backlash because they don't want you talking about those political issues or those social causes.
Or you can be right for one topic and then the other topic, it's going to be completely different.
As soon as you step down that path, you are really on the razor's edge. And it's a constant negotiation every day between you and all your stakeholders. So it's the sort of thing that, on the one hand, you could easily think that a lot of creators are naive and don't really look that far ahead. But on the other hand, it is a lot of creators still struggling, even in creator culture 3.0 or 5.0, wherever we are right now. They're still wanting to maintain some level of credibility and to have some fidelity with their community. Like, they want their community to know, yes, I love beauty products. Yes, I love fast cars. Yes, I love to unbox the latest technology. But that's not all that I am. I'm actually a more complex human being, and so are all of you, and you all have values that may align with mine. One of my favorite things we did last year, we produced a conference called Creators for Change, and it was about this subject of creators getting involved. And this game player showed up, and he said, look, I appreciate the invitation. I'll get off for the chance to come hang out with academics very, very often. Thought it was kind of like, he was like an anthropologist going to visit some exotic world, and we were just sitting in this little conference room. He says, I'm not.
Did he show up with like a selfie stick or something?
He didn't actually stream, which was weird. He's a game player, so there wasn't much he could do from which means he took the day off, which means he kind
so
of
he didn't use it for content.
Not at all. He just showed up and hung out, and then we got him. He came on stage and he goes, "Look, I'm not a change maker. I'm not an activist. I'm not in political. I don't quite know why I was invited here. I play games all day. It's helped me own my home, support my family, put my kids through school." But then he said something interesting. He goes, we raised $1 million last year for a children's hospital, but that doesn't have anything to do with politics. I'm not an activist. And that's, to me, exactly the sublime part of this, which is that these are people who represent communities. And they've monetized their communities, but their communities turn out to be much more complex, and they're always evolving. And I think creators somehow have a almost intuitive understanding of it. They don't even know sometimes how to explain it to weird scholars like me who come around asking them weird questions. And then I suddenly say, who's your community? How do you interact with them? What is your relationship with them?
That's really cool. When I was doing my internet research at that time, I had some following. I was like, I'm going to crawl a bunch of comments and I'll just start doing my research. And in 3 months, I'm done. And my supervisor told me something that has stuck with me until today. She told me that you can't just study internet on the internet. You have to study people as human beings. That's a lot more important because you only see what's on the surface. You don't really get why people do certain things, and you don't get the structural, the fabrics behind. Do you, when you're talking with all these people, with all these huge followings, the fame, the probably making some money from it, do you get the temptation to have some fame online?
Quite the opposite. It isn't because I don't see how it does bring value to their lives, but more I see how incredibly difficult and challenging it is. One of the amazing things about creators is how effortless they make it look when in fact behind the scenes it's not a job, it's not a career, it's an avocation, it's a lifestyle, it's the sort of thing you eat, drink, and breathe it. There's no relief, there's no break. You can't go sit at a bus stop without thinking about content. You can't go on vacation and just turn it off. It's not like you can leave the office. But also the degree to which it's become increasingly a much more sophisticated line of work behind the scenes. There's teams of people involved with helping to grow the business models off of it. There's teams of people now involved with helping generate the content. The one area that is most difficult for creators every creator I've ever talked to, every single one, tries to figure out a way to absorb and read the comments, which can be take its toll. There can be a lot of toxicity, so it's overwhelming. It's a huge amount of work, but they can't give it away. They can't give that job to someone else. The minute someone else responds pretending to be them is the minute they risk losing everything they've built. And to me, that's the most key part of this whole equation. When I came from traditional media, we never knew what the audience thought, right?
And we try not to.
We avoid it, absolutely. We used to call it, in television, we called the audience the Get a Life Club. Because they always were like sitting around coming up with the most weird complaints. And like, I never forget, I made a period murder mystery film. And I went onto a bulletin board that had comments. And I remember this one fan said, look, the writing, the acting, the storytelling was great, but I am so shocked that the filmmakers didn't realize that in the 1920s, the mailboxes were green and not blue. And I'm like, okay, I can't do this. I can't read anymore. I'm done. I'm done. Like, that's the thing that bothered you.
That's your entire takeaway from that.
That's the entire takeaway. So for me, fandom was a toxic space. But for creators, they don't have fans. They have something else. We don't know what to call them. We don't have a great word. In fact, every interview I've done, I said, what do you call your followers, your viewers? They go, well, not followers. We don't call them viewers. They're not audience. They're not fans. They're not friends. They're not family. But particularly in Thailand, they didn't really particularly appreciate the word community because that, I think, has a whole other connotation here that I haven't quite figured out. But no one knows. That's why so many creators come up with a word to describe the people that hang out with them. Like they coin a new term, like the bros or the nerd fighter.
Well, which is easier to assign a specific kind of identity. I think this really, like in China, this really started with 超级女生, the same kind of American Idol is Chinese Supergirl, something like that. The reality show, and every single contestant in the top 10, top 5, they have all their fans, they have their own nicknames, like 玉米, like corn, or 凉粉, like kind of noodles. It's fascinating. People start to just organically form these kind of identities. But now it's, I was talking to a kind of aspiring singer who just came to fame in China. He just started to have his own fan base. And then the fan base started to give him advice. Advice turned into requirements, and the requirement turned into judgments. They're judging like who is dating, what kind of company he is signing up with. And the bigger stars, their agents get this fan consultation, unsolicited consultation all the time. They're like, you should not sign this brand. You should go for more international brands. And it's hilarious.
So I would say two things there, that is absolutely critical. So it isn't just simply that the platforms or the government is also regulating. It more than any of that, the community is trying to govern and regulate what the creators do, because in many ways the creators become a projection of who they are. And they feel like if you don't sign with that brand, or you don't talk about that subject, or you don't wear that outfit, then you're not as closely representing what I want you to be, right? And so it's something that the creators have to deal with constantly, is negotiating that. And it's everywhere. So I'll give you a couple of kind of examples. I mean, one is that here in Thailand, the BL stars have built this massive fandom across Southeast Asia, including China.
What is that?
BL stars, the boy love series. The Thai boy love series.
I grew up reading them.
The
Chinese ones.
They've turned now from a little niche to now like the most successful shows on streaming, right? They're the number one shows on iQIYI and on Tencent Video, on Netflix in this market, etc. I mean, and what's so curious, I think, is that it's a Thai-born phenomenon that spread more to Korea than the other way around. So it's a kind of a unique...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it really actually originated more. It started here, but it really kind of almost was concurrent.
There's one time in Chiang Mai, I just randomly walked into a bookstore. The entire bookstore are just boys love series, or Chinese web fiction translated into Thai. I feel like I was transported back into the 90s. At that time, these kind of publications are not strictly regulated in China. So you go to like the small magazine store, you get like Boys Love magazine.
It's fascinating to me that it kind of also came out of the manga anime kind of side of the YA print pulp. There's also all sorts of splintering now of the BL fan space around Y series versus BL series. And then there's all other questions about whether or not these are actually LGBTQ oriented because they're meant for straight women, right? That's the core fandom. But even the Y series and the BL series are also evolving and starting to become more queer friendly, shall we say.
I think one huge impact it made, not only like a lot of series are adapted into mainstream Chinese television. Of course, they can't really show the love part, but they can show the subtle part. But also they basically normalize queer baiting. You gotta have queer baiting. You gotta have couples that you can fantasize about, be it girl and girl or boy and boy. Yeah.
Also the fact that there's always going to be that dynamic between the one very obviously more masculine athletic guy who's more straight-like. And then the smaller, more effeminate, more comfortably queer kid who's clearly in love with him, but not afraid to have that dynamic and relationship. And then the other one starts to...
Oh, now it's evolved into like 2,000 different kind of genres.
I love it.
There is a show, it's globally huge, Word of Honor. You can find it on Netflix. It's like two equally handsome. You can't really figure out who's the top, who's the bottom. Great. And now they are like...
That's what I've heard. I've heard. So things have gotten interestingly more complicated and interesting. But where I wanted to tie back to what you were saying, though, is now the stars of those BL series are being hired and as brand ambassadors to go out and sell and promote products and services, and even to craft and create their own creator-like kind of space. However, they have to maintain that character that they played in the BL series. So the fans have actually turned pretty hostile and angry when the actors prove to be straight and end up going and having a life and building relationships with people of the opposite sex. It has caused this kind of virulent kind of backlash, and that's because it's a projection, right? They're projecting onto those characters the lives they want to lead, including the ability to be more free about their erotic or their romantic kind of aspiration. When that comes confronted by the reality of the fact that these actors are just playing characters, the fans can get really kind of rough and brutal.
Just nobody can survive this kind of scrutiny, which is terrifying.
It's pretty extraordinary when you consider their livelihoods depend on this. This isn't just, they can't play that character anymore. Their careers may be over. I mean, every creator in every market and in every culture is walking that tightrope. And there's a way in which that younger creators somehow have an intuitive understanding of how to balance that better than older creators who come into it almost like a second career. But, I mean, you have, for example, what happened with Li Jiaqi.
Li Jiaqi.
Li Jiaqi. I mean, we don't need to go into all the details about why he was banned for 3 months and disappeared for 3 months. But what I think was fascinating is that he then came back very successfully on 11/11 and had a huge successful appearance. And then 2 weeks later, he makes that comment to his fans when they complain that his products are getting too expensive. And his response was, well, maybe you should focus more on making more money so you can afford them. And they went nuts. The community did not respond, nor should they have.
That's way beyond the community. It's funny. Like, that was like all Chinese internet was talking about for 2 whole weeks.
Because it touched a nerve that's even bigger, right? It's bigger than just the fact that he just insulted the people he's built a relationship with for a dozen years, which is spectacular collapse, and because he's a brilliant entrepreneur. He knows this space so brilliantly. It's amazing to think that he would make such a tactical error. But you're right. It's a bigger thing. It became a bigger thing, which was, hang on, what sort of classist kind of industry has this become? The seller creator that is out there convincing everyone to buy products because you like these creators turn out to hold their community in contempt. That's not the sort of equitable, just, fair society that we aspire to. I'm not suggesting that any society has done a great job of actually obtaining that. But for 2 weeks that the veneer got stripped away, and obviously he felt tremendous remorse and came back very much with great humility and apology, and this was some sort of but this goes on everywhere. This is not even just a Chinese phenomenon. There are just an infinite number of instances where creators have had these fall from grace moments with their community, and they get banned or backlashed, or the fans turn toxic.
I remember there's a whole genre of YouTube is apology videos.
That's correct. Let's just Jake and Logan Paul. They made a career out of pushing the envelope, going too far. One of the things we talked about in an earlier article about Wanghong was, and I'm gonna screw the term. There's always been this process. Someone called edge ball in ping pong and table tennis.
Right, 擦边球.
Strategy of trying to get the ball as close to the edge as you can means you're more likely to win, but you're also more likely to lose because it could go over the side. Was a term used in the 1990s to describe Chinese filmmakers and storytellers trying to go as far as they could. Cultural producers and storytellers in China were always trying to push the envelope a little bit without going too far. You don't want to get invited to tea. The difference with Wanghong is that the edge is changing every day. Right? One day you're allowed to do that, and the next day you're not. And so there's a spectacular level of precariousness. Right? That's a very academic term, but it's hard to sustain a long-term career in this space, but particularly in different, in every society right now, there's, for example, a huge backlash to technology, an overwhelming sense that it's gotten way out of control. It has way too much power and influence, and particularly social media. And so the response is, in Australia, they're trying to ban 16-year-olds from anyone under 16 from using social media. There are these scholars in the U.S. now claiming that social media is the reason why teenagers are more depressed than they've ever been. All sorts of fairly simple causality that can sometimes be hard to prove, but all sorts of kind of bold claims to say, look, the world might have been better off without social media, or that we need to put the brakes on social media. And the consequence is that creators are caught in the middle. So the example I would give, of course, is the U.S. threatening to shut down TikTok. The first thing that TikTok did was to bring a bunch of U.S. TikTok creators to Washington, D.C. and say, look, if you shut down the platform, this woman who supports her family and children is going to lose her home. Right? Super compelling argument. Obviously didn't work. Didn't convince anyone because the government is looking at much larger geopolitical issues than a group of entrepreneurs on TikTok, which could number in the millions. We don't know. But also a little bit of a contradiction, because TikTok doesn't necessarily do a great job of paying their creators, doesn't necessarily provide them with as much support as they could. The algorithm itself is not driven around cultural community. It's a very different platform from other platforms, and no matter how many times Instagram or YouTube wants to try to copy it, it's not going to be able to do what ByteDance has done. But there's an argument that TikTok isn't even social media anymore, that it's just a storefront. When you think about it, when you see the totality of the way in which people monetize and the platform itself seems to focus their energy. TikTok Shop's taken off in the U.S. as well, which is kind of amazing. One of the things that I've always been trying to figure out, and I can't get an answer to, is TikTok comes along. They obviously have found this magic formula for being able to tap into and really pull everyone's addictive kind of attention online, and then convert that into what we call social commerce, the idea of using the platform to sell goods and products through their shop. But Amazon has owned Twitch for over a decade, and they never figured out how to do that.
Actually, I did a whole story during the COVID outbreak. we were trying to get Amazon to respond about this new trend of live streaming shopping and that's happening in China. And that's where it really took off because people are locked down and they want company. And Amazon wasn't very, at least given the response that I got from the company, yeah, it was pretty bland. It's like, okay, this happened. Yeah, we have our own Amazon streaming platform. That's pretty much it.
Again, I don't have any insider advice, but from an academic lens and from just looking at the differences in the two different markets, Amazon has a monopoly. They don't have to worry about it. Whereas in China, you have a dozen very huge e-commerce platforms. You've got Taobao, Tmall, Pinduoduo, even e-commerce now, of course, the Douyin, and every platform now has their own shop and seller. WeChat, of course, has a whole other marketplace. So the level of competition in those spaces meant that they had to lean much more quickly and heavily into the social commerce kind of concept of there are creators out there who could help us sell the products. Also, the fact is that they also don't have to fight against the advertising industry. There isn't a very centuries-long world of madmen like in Madison Avenue crazy guys who are still clinging to old world kind of 20th century models of how do you sell products and brands and services. So that allowed them to leapfrog and move so quickly into the space. And the government also encouraging a digital economy. They want everyone online, right?
Yeah. I have a question regarding this. In another episode, I asked a few friends who were expats in China, and then after like a whole pandemic, they went back into China. And I asked them like what kind of subtle changes you've seen after all these years away. And one of them told me that her observation is it seems like everybody wants to be a live streamer, want to sell things. Somehow Yuminhong, Xindongfang, New Oriental, like how it transformed from an education company into a live streaming company, that became like a myth, aspiring tale that people look up to. How does that change the fabric of the society if everybody wants to be a Wanghong?
Curiously, by the way, my first teaching job in China was through New Oriental. They brought me in for 2 weeks to teach in Beijing over.
Oh, wow.
Ironically, it was a classroom over a McDonald's. So every day I smelled like cheeseburger when I went home. It was really, it was my first time ever in China.
And I was a New Oriental student. I took their TOEFL class and GRE
That's
class.
Right.
And
all the training for all the college classes.
And by the way, New Oriental has brought up generations of Chinese Wanghongs. So many influencers came from it because one of the main draw for New Oriental is that it's not only just teaching, it's also very entertaining. It started with people spreading these quotes from this New Oriental teacher, and then it became video clips, as different batches of Wanghong emerge. New Oriental just produced all these generations and generations of influencers.
I mean, so there's three things that's ironic about that. One is this conversation you and I just had started with me talking about watching movies in the classroom and thinking they were educational. So for me, media and technology and education were always combined, and entertainment to me was a tool. Carrier, it was a way to deliver knowledge. It wasn't separate from knowledge. You came up out of the news industry and you witnessed firsthand how many people are like, oh, entertainment, not anti-news, it's anti-information, it's distraction, it's about pleasure, it's all sorts of anything but knowledge. For me, the two were not separate at all. Entertainment was a device, a narrative storytelling mechanism, right, to help you care about people while you learn more about their lived experience. So, that's fascinating. So, and then secondly there is this still ongoing belief that social media and YouTube cannot be a mechanism for education or learning, which has been so clearly debunked by creators in the West. I mean, the best example would be the Vlog Brothers, Hank and John Green. Yeah. They've got, all sorts of threads and strands and shows that they've built on YouTube, like the science show that went on to get picked up by PBS. To share with kids and to teach kids, and again, using the best strategies of vlogging as educational. But this whole idea of New Oriental then quickly recognizing the value of social media and online strategies to continue to expand their business in that space, which then ended up becoming the only business that they had in this space when their core business got shut down, is super fascinating. But the rise of the Wanghong, to me, was the minute everyone could launch their own Taobao store in China. It didn't matter what platform they were on. The minute that they could post a link to their Taobao store and be able to not just sell their own products, but sell other products and brands and get click-through value and get money, just say, oh, you hung out with me today talking about what I did at school today. Oh, by the way, let me tell you where I bought this shirt. Go over to my store and you can get, a piece of it. It became this, really was the gasoline.
I think to me, the landmark is like WeChat store, like Weishang. At a point, everybody can be a Weishang on WeChat. Some people, they just start their own WeChat group. They just sell things on WeChat group. And there are Ponzi schemes and, the multi-layered marketing thing got in.
Pyramid stuff.
Yeah, pyramid stuff. But Weishang was a really important thing because that's where two terms came to being. One is 私域流量, your private traffic. Even though you're not a Wanghong, you can have like 1,000 friends and you can sell things to them.
Friends. See how we use terms like friends in rabbit quotes? Like friends who buy the products you happen to mention. I don't know, in real world, do we do that? Maybe we do a little bit. Word of mouth is still real.
Yeah, and the other thing is the term like micro-influencers. On WeChat and on Instagram, that's where people start to realize, actually, I can cash out my social connections.
Yeah. So that goes back to your question that you asked, which is, what is the broader impact on society when we can commodify all our online relationships? What happens when, on the one hand, the more seemingly authentic and credible and the greater fidelity we have with our community, the more powerful that community becomes, but also the more lucrative it becomes. The more you can monetize it. There are many business models now that creators and Wanghong use. What does it mean? And I tend to be a contrarian in that regard. I ask a slightly different question. To what extent have we always put some form of transactional value on our relationships?
Oh.
There, I went there. Uh-oh.
But there is another bigger backdrop I have to raise here, is that also this is a time where people start to really grow their distrust on institutions. Why work 996? 996有什么意义? Why do you want to work for a company if your own connections can already make money for you? A lot of creators that I know, they're artists, they're singers, let's do workshops. They can teach people. They can use their limited influence to get more fundings for themselves. A lot of people are exploring a way to live without institution. And that's the time they realize, okay, having an audience is amazing.
Well, it does create more opportunities for them. Right. I mean, I think there's two different ways to think about the sociocultural things that are going on around Chinese capitalism in the moment. So there is, of course, the 996 movement and this recognition that, hang on, I can work as hard as I can and every waking moment of my day and never reach the same level of success that my parents had now. And that's spectacularly fraught. And that's contributing to the lie down movement, right? That, okay, why am I working so hard to do this? Right. But it would be a mistake to think that those are the same people who are then turning into Wanghong, because Wanghong is still extremely difficult. It's much harder than it looks. It only seems easy online because it's kind of part of the strategy is to make it look like, oh, we're just hanging out online. We're just being friends. We're just being pals. Right. What you don't know is they had to invest in all sorts of tech equipment. What you don't know is that there's 30 people sitting in the other room helping them sell products and push out brands and deals, or helping them negotiate with, showing up at a club or at a mall or managers and all sorts of MCNs and brokers trying to help convert their community into profit. Yeah. So it's an illusion that it's easier, but I think there's also an anti-corporate attitude that's emerging, which is
for sure
the pandemic kind of thrust into everyone's line of sight. Oh, I don't have to stay on the gerbil wheel forever, right? The gerbil wheel stopped.
Okay.
Right? And suddenly everyone said, oh, hang on. I'm on a gerbil wheel. I don't have to be.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it also plays into what you see a lot here in Chiang Mai around this whole weird digital nomad thing, which is the idea, I don't have to be on the gerbil wheel in a conventional sense, 9 to 5, dressing up, going to an office every day. On the other hand, they're on a different gerbil wheel. It's a different gerbil wheel. It's still a gerbil wheel.
Yeah, I think the argument sometimes, I would say, is that at least like you put in 100% of your effort for yourself. There is one fun anecdote that kind of contextualized the whole thing. It was also like a China's online discussion topic for 2 weeks. There's a Wanghong CEO for Glee. She's called Dong Mingzhu. And she hired an executive assistant from a TV show. That executive assistant has like a few hundred thousands of followers on Xiaohongshu or something like that. And in the end, after a while, she realized, okay, this relationship doesn't work. She fired her. Her argument is that you can't be working for this company. I'm giving you such a great job, but you're running your own home business. Then people are like, okay, that's super understandable. Like if she's having 400,000 or whatever, like millions of followers, why would she be working for you anyway?
It has to do with the future of labor.
Right.
Because there's almost, Wanghong creator culture is changing so much about the whole labor force out there. And the flip side of that, which is absolutely a credible argument, which is what does it matter what that assistant does in their free time? If they want to build a community and monetize it on the side, that's fine, as long as they're doing their job, right? Why should it matter? The flip side is that we have some evidence that every company out there wants to hire creators but not pay them to then help the company become Wanghong or creators. They feel like on the one hand they know that these 22-year-olds who built their own businesses online have all sorts of skills, but they don't know what to call them and they don't want to pay them for it. And then they want to hire them to come in and help the firm, the business, become in its own way more profitable in a social space. But they're not supporting them. They're not paying them. But these are the most skilled. This is the whole class of skilled labor that no one calls skilled, because they're like, oh, you just hung out on social media, you made some money. Oh, that's great. How many followers do you have? Okay, then we'll hire you to be an assistant, to be an intern, to be a manager, to be whatever the roles are still as they're defined without any extra pay or recognition. Like if I walked into a company and I had 10 years of experience and I had a degree in that field and I had all sorts of recognition, to walk into that space and be paid like an assistant, but then asked to use those skills that you've built for a decade and then not be recognized for it is spectacularly fraught. But also a suggestion that we might want to get our heads around the fact that being a creator is one of the most extraordinarily valuable skills that you could have for any career.
Right.
Not just in marketing. Any career, if you want to be an engineer or in the finance side of the industry. One of the more weird, bizarre things that came out of some research recently was that people most publishing about creators in the academic field were journals of dentistry, dental journals. It was so weird. We're like, what? This must be a glitch, right? We kept going back and looking at the data. And what we discovered and started to realize is that dentists are different from doctors. Doctors can get jobs working in hospitals. They can get jobs in clinics. They can work for NGOs. But dentists are more often than not also entrepreneurs. And the only way to really grow their dentist business is to become creator experts in dental care.
That's fascinating. And I personally follow a few dentist influencers. I had my 3 wisdom tooth removed last month, and I've been like binging a shit ton of dental content.
And you want to make sure you're going with someone who has got a proven track record. And they know what they're doing, and they're talented, and they're not going to screw up your mouth, right? So it ends up becoming a credibility issue. And so they're being actually taught in dental school how to be a creator. which is kind of wild when you think about it.
It's so weird that just the video itself, it's satisfying to watch.
It is. It's got like a payoff. There's a before, middle, and after, right? It's a fairy tale, right? You can see someone's teeth totally, and how it changes the way they feel about them. So it's the same with, there's so many, there's a whole weird, I don't mean to normalize it. There's all sorts of interesting subgenres that pop up every now and then.
Right.
One of them was this subgenre of people who clean out sewer grates so that when there's like a backup and there's like the streets flooded or the parking lot's flooded, and they go in and they clean it out, and then all of it goes away, and it gives you this weird comforting sense of like the world has suddenly been fixed. Like there's at least in this one brief set of issues, things got better, right? And whoever that magical person was that goes in and cleans out the sewer line or pulls something out of the plumbing or fixes something, and you can see, physically witness things go the way it's meant to be. There's a larger, almost I hesitate to say, almost like a spiritual kind of satisfaction. It's a payoff. It's a dreams come true, living happily ever after kind of myth that you can witness in the span of a 15-second TikTok,
Is that a genre that you're personally invested in?
It's interesting. As soon as I even talk about it, of course, the weirdness about our computers is that if you even mention it out to someone right now, watch the next time I turn on my social media, that's what it'll be.
Yeah.
I have my own weird, or maybe not weird, I keep normalizing it. I'm a dog fanatic. I probably spend half an hour every day not only looking at dog reels on Instagram, but sending them to my best friend, who wakes up every morning now because I'm on the other side of the world.
Right.
She wakes up every morning. And I say, look, these are love letters. I'm just letting you know, I loved this. It made me happy. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me feel good. And I love you. And I want you to know, I wanted you to have a chance to also witness it and share that experience. But don't feel obliged. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to comment. You don't have to share. You don't have to say anything.
First of all, this is incredibly cute. And then this is also common practice. I have a friend. We just talked about this 2 days ago. She's a very busy person. She has a very big job. When she get a moment, she would turn on Instagram and watch like a ton of dog reels that her partner sent to her. And her partner says that you don't have to watch it. It's just, I'm watching it. I want to share this with you. And if you have time, you want to relax, you just check it out. Yeah.
It's a form of relaxation, but also it is about an interactivity. It's a sense of, it's not just that I enjoyed it. I want to share it with someone who I also know enjoys that sort of thing, and it's someone who I love and care about.
We get to have a laugh together, be it asynchronously.
Yes. The things that I think often get missed in when we always take a much more dystopian critical line on this phenomenon of social media and creator culture.
Right.
I still don't know how we could have made it through the pandemic without social media. I just don't understand why that isn't something that we factor into our critiques of social media, because without social media, what would the fabric of society have looked like? Well, imagine what the world might have witnessed if we hadn't had the capacity to stay in touch, to retain some form of social ties to the world, to other people, to our friends, to a broader community. It's frustrating to me a little bit as an academic, and this is completely biased and not empirical, but it strikes me as a lot of my colleagues are not looking, that they've almost pretended like it didn't happen. Like they've put it was so traumatic and it was so profound and so monumental that they almost treated it like it was this closed off 3 years where the world just kind of stopped. But it didn't. Our lives continued. We all grew older. I definitely did. But we maintained some connection to the world through technology. And we monetized it as well. And that part really supercharged the whole Wanghong creator space. But I think we haven't come to terms with the fact that need to be present online is more palpable than ever. It's also liberated us. Look at your life. You can be present now through all sorts of mediums and technology that has afforded you a freedom to live and thrive in places that you wouldn't have been able to in other ways. I mean, it's kind of extraordinary.
Well, now that you've mentioned, I realize I took a lot of things for granted, like how this kind of connection, this capacity to connect with other people.
That's a win. I'll take that as a victory.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
Great.
But this is why people accuse me of being celebratory, because I tend to always come in with a more nuanced and maybe a less dystopian lens on this. And it goes all the way back to the 8-year-old kid in me.
Right.
For me, Hollywood was a tool for making me care about other people's lives. And then I also became an LGBTQ activist in Hollywood, and I knew how important it was to get our stories told out there, and that sort of representation was something that was vital, especially during the AIDS crisis. The only thing they knew about gay people then was we were infected. And so that became really vital to our survival as a community and as a group of people and a marginalized group of people. So my first impulse is now, when I look at social media and I look at this creator culture, is to not necessarily only see it as a glass half empty or some sort of toxic kind of world, but that it's got the capacity for greater forms of representation and agency and entrepreneurialism. And there's never been a technology or a medium in the world that's allowed more people to thrive and explore alternatives to the system than we've had before, for good or bad.
I just feel sometimes it's not about judgment, but the full picture. Like, do you look at it or not? When I was in the States, you basically on the media, you just see like how destructive the whole thing is, which they have every reason to call it. But the thing is, when I detach myself from this singular discourse, basically, I talk to people about how to build a xiaohongshu business, how to thrive on WeChat, how to do it on Weibo. And the thing is, it's how the society is. And people are using their brain to figure things out for themselves, to build a life on it, to make money, to fight for their causes. And people can use it to their advantage a lot of times.
Any technology carried out to its ultimate ends and extremes, especially in capitalism, is going to have all sorts of abuses and needs always to have a much more cautious and careful way in which it's being governed and regulated. If you leave it only to the tech companies, they're not going to necessarily serve the better interests of the public. But as a journalist, your job was to go out and identify a problem and then see if you can interrogate where it came from and what where the roots of that problem are. That's also true as an academic. We sometimes confuse a thesis statement with a thesis problem. A thesis statement would say, why does it work this way? A thesis problem would say, what's wrong with how it works? And there's a tendency as scholars to want to go with the latter, because that creates kind of a baked in, again, another narrative of, well, there's something wrong. We've got to interrogate it. We've got to figure out why it's
critical
bad.
thinking.
It's critical thinking, right?
Yeah.
But it often can lead to all sorts of bias. It's a deeply normalized position of judgment, which is, it's not just that it exists and it's different from what we've witnessed before. There must be something wrong with it. I get frustrated with that perspective because it tends to do three things. It infantilizes the people who use it. So, you poor, innocent, naive children on social media don't realize how terrible and manipulative and exploitative and how you're just cogs in the wheel and that kind of thing. And that kind of, I find, attitude is a bit problematic. It also means you're only looking at the darker and more nefarious and exploitative nature of this system, and not, again, a more balanced and nuanced understanding of how, for many people, it's provided opportunities they would never otherwise have.
Yeah.
But the third is that it's shaping policy. Yeah. It's the government is turning to scholars and saying, help us understand what's going on here. And the scholars are turning around and saying, well, here's all these problems we found, and they're legit. Yeah. But the problem is that there's no other set of answers that they can offer, because they've only looked at it through the lens of a problem and not necessarily of a difference. I tend to think of my work as more comparative. So, for example, the first book was comparing this new industry on social media from the cultural industries of Hollywood. The second one was comparing the global creator culture to Chinese Wanghong culture.
Right.
And now, of course, things have gotten even more complicated because Chinese platforms have been going out. And you're seeing this huge backlash around the world to the extraordinary power of these platforms to do things that their platforms can't, being framed as larger geopolitical issues of cyber sovereignty, but it's often the people in Silicon Valley getting pissed off that they got passed over.
Because of all these geopolitical reasons, TikTok might be banned, but this format would not be banned. The content, the narrative, like how people produce things, produce certain kind of videos, there's real short, this kind of short TV drama and the web fiction, all of these things, they're still spreading and quite widely.
One of my favorite things recently is someone tried to present the argument that we are rapidly losing attention span because of TikTok. That we are now moving away from storytelling to addiction, right? A kind of addictive quality. Until you realize that news segments on broadcast news television were rarely longer than 1 minute.
Right.
Talent shows, which go all the way back to early radio and broadcasting, were about 2 to 3 minute performances.
Yeah.
Right? This idea that only long form somehow is meaningful and has social, cultural virtue and value, and that these short form kinds of technologies that are currently very popular is kind of ludicrous. Also, the most successful YouTube video last week was a 4-hour video about this that this young creator made about the Star Wars hotels at Disneyland. It blew up. It became a huge thing. The most successful channel or phenomenon on TikTok was a 66-part mini-series on TikTok that this woman made about real-life romance going bad. Right. And now they're hiring people as the executive in charge of TikTok mini-series, which is, 50-plus segments about storytelling over the course of multiple.
Right.
TikTok just changed their technology to allow for 1-hour videos.
Yeah.
So this idea that the short form of the length is somehow the big disruptor, I'm not buying it.
No, I remember before, remember that the real cut of a song has to be shorter than 4 minutes?
That's right. Movies had to be no more than 90 minutes to 2 hours because you had to at least show it 5 times a day in the theater.
Yeah.
So there were larger underlying reasons why things storytelling got changed and media technology and formats changed.
Yeah. I'm always wary about certain kind of corruptive discourse. Okay, this thing is so bad that it's going to change your entire thing, is because I came from a time that I played video games in China in the 90s where like one piece of op-ed about comparing video games to electronic heroin destroyed my entire childhood. I believe if my mom had the opportunity to send me to electric shock, she would. I just remember all these kind of different narratives building this to be a monster, but I was fine. The issues do exist, shorter attention span and people get distracted, lower in grades and all of that. It's not about the video game. It's really about the loneliness, the part of being neglected, probably being queer, all of that things combined. And of course, the game played one factor. It's actually a helpful factor that helped me to escape.
100%. Media was as much a salvation for you as it was an addiction. It can do both. It can be both things. I mean, the addictive model around media and the kind of what we call technological determinism, the idea that this medium is changing the way the whole world and children's brains and all that, is nothing new. I mean, one of the more fascinating, I showed this great BBC clip in my class around what they call media moral panics. And the idea is that, it was 90s, it was video games. In the 80s, it was music videos. In the 70s, it was children's programming in the Saturday morning cartoons. In the 60s, it was the comic books. And in the 50s, it was rock and roll. But my favorite was that in the 1870s, they said that the novel was causing mass suicides around the world, because up until that point, it was either religious text or history books. That was it for most texts. Literature had not really taken off, and the novel as a form hadn't really emerged until the mid-19th century. And the first response to the novel was, oh, it's an addiction that's destroying people's minds and it's causing people to literally kill themselves. So this isn't anything new in that regard. That said, I do not want to dismiss or play down the fact that there are consequences for every technology and medium that we use. It would just be great if we could look at it in a more nuanced and kind of holistic way, as opposed to saying, it's like a doctor whose only diagnosis is, you have cancer and you have to die. Like that's the only solution ever to this kind of framework, right?
Yeah. Another question is like for everyday people, for everybody has to deal with social media one way or another. Avoidance is also a way of dealing with it. How do we look at our relationship with social media?
Creator culture and Wanghong culture has now been around so long that everyone's grown up on that of a certain generation, what I call the platform generations, the Weibo and the Douyin population or Jiangshu population. They're all different types of social media generations. They understand the world from the platforms that they grew up on. And for them, being Wanghong is like almost like a natural extension of development in their whole childhood. Like, I hang out with my friends online. I can turn that into a business. Who wouldn't want that? When you put it in that context of, all the fun that I have hanging out on social media can actually be paid for and support me. And so we've now had this example of, since around 2014, the number one career around the world for 10-year-olds is to be a creator or Wanghong.
YouTuber, I saw that survey.
And the survey's been going on now for over a decade. And of course, the response is, oh my God. The response is, what? Not an astronaut, a fireman, none of those things? No. But that's until you stop and realize that, it's no different than wanting to be a professional baseball player, right? Like when you were a game player in the 90s, if someone had said to you, you know what? You could make a living as a game player online. You could build that into a whole business. You could be the next ninja, which is, or Markiplier. And build a whole empire based on people's love of watching you and learning from you and hanging out with you in the games. Why wouldn't you? Everyone wants to grow up to be Michael Jordan, right?
Well, on that note, I actually have a piece of information for you. Remember Yanxi Palace, that show that gave you 15 minutes in China? In the past few months, Yanxi Palace is back to the headline.
Why?
The whole story is very complicated, but Yanxi Palace came out at a time where there was another TV show, was said to be a lot more tasteful, but all of a sudden people started to discover that show wasn't very good. It was actually very bad. So it was also partially because one of the actors, her team somehow got into a fight with influencers. And now Yanxi Palace has come back to the headline to prove that how much better the show was than the other show, Rizhuan.
Well, we've gone full circle here, haven't we? So Fandom is reimagining even 10-year-old TV shows and basically getting into all sorts of these kind of battles and contestations. And
exactly.
And
this is your time.
I know. I knew that's where you were going. I know. You're like, bring Professor Wanghong back.
Exactly. But that was pretty much all my questions.
This was great. I have no idea how, we went, almost 2 hours? That's nuts. So you've got a lot of editing to do. You got a lot of material to work with.
It was great.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. This was super easy. This was like a conversation, which is the best kind of one.